You won't believe the chaos that started from something as simple as me deciding to take a swim in my own lake. I had been working long hours all week, my head buried in paperwork and endless meetings, and finally, I had one of those rare afternoons free. The sun was out, the sky was clear, and the lake outside my cabin shimmered like a sheet of glass just begging me to dive in. I grabbed a towel, threw on some swim trunks, and walked down to the dock barefoot, enjoying the warm wood under my feet. To me, this lake wasn't just water, it was peace, it was freedom, and more importantly, it was mine. I had worked for years to afford this property, carefully chosen it because of the private lakefront access, and I made sure when I signed the deed that it included water rights. So the last thing I expected was for someone to try and tell me what I could or couldn't do in my own backyard. But I should have known better, because living in this neighborhood meant living under the shadow of one woman, HOA Karen. The moment I dived into the water and resurfaced, letting the sun warm my face, I heard her voice slice through the calm like a blade. "Excuse me. You can't swim there." I blinked, thinking maybe I was hearing things. But when I looked toward the dock, there she was, Karen in all her glory, arms crossed, lips pursed, her sunglasses sliding down her nose as she glared at me like I had just robbed a bank. I actually laughed out loud, thinking she had to be joking. "You're kidding, right? This is my property. My lake," I said, treading water casually. But she didn't budge. "Rules are rules. The HOA doesn't allow recreational swimming without prior approval," she snapped, pulling out her phone as if she were about to call in backup. I swam a little closer to the dock, still half amused, half irritated. "Karen, listen. You don't control this lake." "I do. I bought this land. I have the deed, and it includes full lake access. You can't tell me I can't swim here." She smirked, shaking her head like I was some clueless child. "We'll see about that. I'm filing a report, and you'll be fined. Don't think you can ignore the rules just because you think you're special." And with that, she stormed off, heels clicking angrily against the wood of the dock. I thought it was ridiculous, but honestly, I brushed it off. Karen had a reputation for being dramatic, for turning small things into mountains, and I figured she was just blowing hot air. Little did I know, she wasn't bluffing. The very next morning, when I went out to grab my mail, there it was, a bright white envelope with the HOA's seal on the front. I opened it casually, not expecting much, but the moment my eyes scanned the paper, my jaw almost hit the ground. Notice of violation, unauthorized recreational swimming. Fine, $1,000. My first reaction was disbelief. How in the world could they fine me for using my own lake? My second reaction was pure fury. This wasn't just ridiculous, it was illegal. They had crossed a line, and they didn't even realize it. I stood there on my porch, the letter shaking in my hands, feeling the anger build in my chest. It wasn't just about the money, though $1,000 was no small amount. It was about the principle. I had worked my whole life for this property, and I wasn't about to let some overzealous HOA led by Karen dictate how I enjoyed my own land. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just Karen being Karen. This was the HOA testing me, seeing how much control they could assert, and if I backed down now, they'd think they owned me. I knew their type. They thrived on intimidation, on making people too scared or too tired to fight back. But I wasn't going to be one of those people. As I stared out at the lake, calm and perfect in the morning sun, I made a decision right then and there. If Karen and her HOA cronies wanted a fight, I was going to give them one. And not just any fight. I was going to make sure they regretted ever putting my name on that fine. Little did Karen know, she had just lit a fire under me that she wasn't ready to handle. This wasn't going to end with me paying a dime. No, by the time I was done, she was the one who was going to be paying. And not just a little. I was going to make her pay 5 times over. And I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when it happened. I walked into the next HOA meeting carrying a folder so thick it could have doubled as a weapon. I wasn't the type to get into neighborhood drama, but this wasn't just about a fine anymore, this was about setting the record straight. As I stepped into the community hall, the chatter quieted a little, and I could feel the eyes on me. Some neighbors nodded politely, others avoided eye contact, but at the very front sat the queen of chaos herself, Karen. She was sitting in the first row, chin up, arms folded, lips pursed like she was already celebrating my defeat. The smug look on her face made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. If I was going to win this, I needed to play smart, not angry. When the board opened the floor, I stood up, cleared my throat, and placed my documents on the podium. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "I'm here to dispute the fine issued against me for swimming in my own lake." That got some murmurs from the audience. A few neighbors glanced at each other like they hadn't even heard about it yet. I continued, "My deed clearly states that I own not only the property, but also the water rights to my section of the lake. The HOA has no jurisdiction over this area, and therefore the fine is invalid." I held up the deed for everyone to see, pointing to the section that proved my claim. But of course, Karen wasn't going to let me speak without interruption. She shot up from her chair and snapped, "Rules are rules. If you live in this community, you follow them. It doesn't matter what you think your deed says, the HOA governs all behavior around shared property." The smugness in her voice was unbearable. I smiled thinly and replied, "Karen, with all due respect, the lakefront is not shared property. It's mine. You can't just rewrite the law to suit your personal agenda." The board members looked uneasy, shifting in their seats. Some of them clearly hadn't expected me to come armed with legal documents. I pressed on, not giving Karen another chance to hijack the moment. "Furthermore," I said, raising my voice slightly so the entire room could hear, "issuing fines for something outside of HOA jurisdiction is not only invalid, it's illegal. And if this board insists on upholding the fine, I will have no choice but to take legal action for damages." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Nobody liked the idea of a lawsuit, especially not one involving the HOA, because it meant everyone's dues could go up to cover legal costs. But instead of backing down, Karen scoffed loudly and waved her hand dismissively. "He's bluffing. He's just trying to scare us. The fine stands." I almost laughed at her arrogance. Bluffing? If only she knew how serious I was. I had already spoken to a lawyer friend who confirmed everything I was saying. Karen thought she could bulldoze me, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. Still, the board decided to side with her. They upheld the fine, ignoring the documents I had presented, ignoring logic, ignoring the law. That's when something inside me clicked. I realized that this wasn't going to be solved by logic or fairness, because Karen had too much influence over the board. If I wanted to win, I had to play the game smarter than they did. I left that meeting furious but determined. On the walk home, the plans started forming in my head. What Karen and her little army didn't know was that I wasn't just some regular homeowner. Last year, the community had voted me in as HOA treasurer. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just a boring role, one where I'd sign off on budgets and handle numbers. But now? That role gave me power. Power Karen didn't realize I had. That night, I stayed up late digging through HOA financial records. Page after page, I uncovered things that made my jaw drop. The HOA wasn't just badly managed, they were drowning in deficits. For years, money had been wasted on unnecessary projects, like landscaping improvements, that cost triple what they should have, all handled by companies that just happened to be connected to Karen's cousin. Meanwhile, real problems, like road repairs, drainage issues, and safety upgrades, were being ignored. The deeper I dug, the more I realized the HOA was standing on a financial time bomb, and Karen was sitting right on top of it. And here's where it got interesting. According to the bylaws, the treasurer, meaning me, had the authority to propose emergency fee increases if the HOA funds were insufficient. The board could fight it, but the language was written in such a way that if there was clear financial evidence, they had little choice but to approve it. That was when the perfect revenge plan crystallized in my mind. Karen thought she could fine me $1,000. Fine. I would raise everyone's HOA fees by $5,000. Legally. In broad daylight. With her own crooked bookkeeping as the justification. The beauty of it was, she couldn't fight back. Not without exposing herself and the shady contracts that had drained the budget in the first place. For the first time since I opened that fine letter, I smiled. Karen had lit this fire, but now I was going to burn her whole empire down. I spent the next week preparing everything. I organized the documents, highlighted every deficit, and calculated exactly how much the community would need to cover the gap. I practiced my speech, making sure every word was airtight. By the time the next board meeting rolled around, I was ready. And this time, Karen had no idea what was coming. The board meeting that night felt different the second I walked into the room. The atmosphere was tense, like the whole place was buzzing with whispers before the storm. Neighbors were already seated, flipping through the agenda packets, chatting nervously about dues and neighborhood gossip, but I could tell something big was about to happen. And then, of course, there she was, Karen. She sat right up front like she owned the room, her chair angled slightly so she could glare at everyone without even turning her head. Her lips curled into a smug little smile when she saw me walk in, like she thought I was here to beg for mercy. Little did she know, this was going to be the night everything turned upside down. I waited patiently while the board droned on about landscaping updates and parking issues. Then came the treasurer's report, which meant it was my time to shine. I stood up slowly, holding the thick binder of records I had prepared. The room quieted as I carried it to the front table and set it down with a satisfying thud. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice calm but firm, after conducting a detailed review of the HOA's finances, I've discovered some serious problems that cannot be ignored. I could practically feel Karen rolling her eyes, but I ignored her. I flipped open the binder and began reading numbers out loud, expenses that were never approved, landscaping bills 3 times the normal rate, maintenance fees that had vanished without explanation. With each page I turned, the murmurs in the room grew louder. People were leaning forward now, craning their necks to see. For the past 3 years, I continued, tapping a highlighted section, this HOA has been running at a deficit. We've been spending more than we're bringing in, and unless we address this immediately, we could face serious legal and financial consequences. A man in the back raised his hand, his voice worried. Are you saying we're broke? I nodded gravely. We're worse than broke. We're in debt. And unless this board takes immediate action, every homeowner here could be liable. Now the whispers turned into panicked voices. People were looking around at each other, their expressions shifting from confusion to anger. Some looked straight at Karen, because they knew exactly who had been pushing for all those unnecessary beautification projects. She squirmed in her seat, her smug smile fading for the first time. That's when I delivered the knockout punch. I pulled out a sheet of paper and held it high. As treasurer, and under Section 12, subsection B of the HOA bylaws, I am proposing an emergency fee assessment to cover these deficits. Effective immediately, every household will be required to pay an additional $5,000 in fees. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, even a few curses. People were on their feet, pointing fingers, demanding answers. Karen shot up like a rocket, slamming her hands on the table. This is outrageous. You can't just force us to pay $5,000. That's insane. I stayed perfectly calm, flipping open the bylaws book I had brought with me. Actually, I can. The rules are very clear. When the HOA operates at a deficit, the treasurer has the authority to propose an emergency assessment. And given the evidence, we have no choice but to cover the shortfall immediately. I let the silence stretch for a moment, watching Karen's face turn red. She sputtered, pointing at me like she wanted to physically throw me out of the room. "You're doing this out of spite. This is because of the swimming fine, isn't it? Admit it." I smiled politely, shaking my head. "This is because of years of financial mismanagement. I didn't create this problem. But I am solving it. And unfortunately, that means everyone, including you, has to pay their share." The beauty of it was that everything I said was completely true. Karen had created this mess with her shady spending, but now she had no way out. She couldn't deny the deficit, because I had every receipt, every number, every check written to her cousin's so-called landscaping company. And the other board members? They were too scared of legal liability to argue. If they ignored my proposal, they could be held personally responsible. So when it came time to vote, their hands shook as they raised them one by one. All in favor of approving the emergency fee assessment, the chairperson said quietly, "Raise your hands." Every board member raised theirs. Even the ones who clearly hated it. Karen, of course, refused, crossing her arms and glaring at them all like they had just betrayed her. But it didn't matter. The vote passed. The new fees were official. For a moment, the room was pure chaos. Neighbors were shouting, some demanding refunds, others demanding Karen's resignation. People wanted to know how things had gotten so bad, and I was more than happy to point out the very contracts Karen had pushed through year after year. The more I spoke, the more the crowd turned against her. She tried to fight back, yelling over me, but her words were drowned out by the chorus of angry homeowners. It was like watching her empire crumble in real time, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. But just when things were about to spiral out of control, I calmly held up my hand and said, "One more thing. I am also formally appealing the fine issued against me for swimming in my own lake. Given that the HOA has no jurisdiction over private water rights, I expect the board to overturn it immediately." The chairperson looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He glanced at Karen, who was practically foaming at the mouth, and then back at me. Yes, the board will, review that fine." I didn't let him wiggle out. "Not review. Overturn. Tonight. Or I will add a lawsuit on top of the financial mess you're already facing." That did it. They scrambled to hold a quick vote, and just like that, my $1,000 fine was gone. Not only had I erased the ridiculous punishment Karen had tried to pin on me, but I had also slapped her with a $5,000 bill of her own. As I walked out of that meeting, binder under my arm and a smile on my face, I couldn't help but think about how sweet justice could taste when it was served legally, right in front of the very person who thought they owned you. Karen had played her game, but I had played it better. And the best part was, this was only the beginning of her downfall. The fallout from that meeting spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By the very next morning, the gossip was everywhere. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other in months were suddenly gathering in driveways, whispering about the shocking $5,000 assessment. Some people were furious, some were scared, but most of them were outraged that it had come to this. And every single conversation had one name in common, Karen. For years she had strutted around like the queen of the HOA, barking orders, threatening fines, and bullying people into doing what she wanted. But now the spotlight was finally on her, and it wasn't flattering. People were beginning to connect the dots. The overpriced landscaping projects? Karen had pushed those. The ridiculous new regulations about fences and mailboxes? Karen's idea. The HOA running out of money year after year? All tied back to her influence. My binder of financial evidence had cracked her carefully built facade wide open, and the community was finally seeing her for what she was. It didn't take long before the angry knocks on her door started. I remember walking past her house one evening and seeing a crowd of neighbors on her front lawn, waving the new assessment notices in their hands, demanding answers. She stood on her porch trying to shout over them, insisting it wasn't her fault, that I was the villain who had done this to everyone. But the more she yelled, the less they believed her. Some of them even shouted back, "We saw the records. You wasted our money, and why should we trust you anymore?" I won't lie, it was satisfying to watch her squirm. For once, she wasn't the one pointing the finger. She was the one being cornered. And the angrier the neighbors got, the weaker her voice became. I didn't even have to say a word. She was unraveling all on her own. Within a week, several homeowners had formally called for a special election to remove her from the board. The HOA bylaws allowed it if enough people signed a petition, and the signatures poured in faster than anyone expected. People who had been too afraid to speak up before were suddenly lining up to sign. It was like the entire community had been waiting for this moment, and I had just lit the match. When the special election was finally scheduled, the turnout was massive. The meeting hall was packed wall to wall, every seat taken, with neighbors standing along the back wall just to witness what was about to happen. Karen walked in looking like she had aged 10 years in a week. She still tried to hold her head high, but the fire in her eyes was gone. The vote was quick, almost merciless. One by one, people stood and cast their votes to remove her as president of the HOA. Some even gave little speeches about how tired they were of her power trips, her intimidation, her misuse of authority. By the time the count was finished, the result wasn't even close. Karen was officially out. And the look on her face when they announced it was something I'll never forget: shock, anger, humiliation all rolled into one. But the surprise didn't end there. The board immediately opened nominations for a new president, and to my shock, several neighbors stood up and nominated me. At first, I tried to wave it off. I hadn't planned on taking the position, I just wanted to put Karen in her place and get my freedom back. But the room erupted with cheers and claps, and suddenly it was clear the community wanted someone they could trust. When the vote came, I was unanimously elected as the new HOA president. Me, the guy Karen had tried to fine for swimming in his own lake. Talk about poetic justice. My first order of business as president was simple: undo the damage Karen had caused. I called for an immediate audit of the finances, terminated the shady contracts with her cousin's company, and set up a transparent system so every homeowner could see where their money was going. The $5,000 assessment stayed in place for the time being, but I made sure every penny of it went toward real improvements: repaving the cracked roads, fixing the drainage that caused flooding every rainy season, upgrading the community park that had been neglected for years. People weren't thrilled about paying extra, but when they saw real results, they started thanking me. For once, the HOA was actually working for the community, not against it. And I made sure to add one new clause to the bylaws: HOA jurisdiction could never extend to private property rights, including lakefront access. No one would ever again be threatened with a fine for using their own land. As for Karen, she didn't take her downfall gracefully. At first, she tried to rally a group of supporters to protest my leadership, but nobody wanted to follow her anymore. She was toxic, and everyone knew it. She tried spreading rumors, claiming I had framed her, but the evidence was too strong. People had seen the documents with their own eyes, and they weren't buying her lies. Eventually, she stopped showing up to meetings altogether. Word spread that she had listed her house for sale, unable to stomach the idea of living in a community where she no longer had power. A few months later, the moving trucks came, and just like that, Karen was gone. Watching from my porch as she drove away for the last time, I couldn't help but smile. She had fined me $1,000 for daring to swim in my own lake, but in the end, she paid the price: $5,000, her position, her reputation, and her place in the neighborhood she once ruled. And I got everything I wanted: my lake back, my peace of mind, and a community finally free from her reign of terror. It taught me something important: People like Karen thrive on control, but the moment you stand up and use the rules against them, they crumble. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or violent. It's calm, calculated, and delivered right in front of everyone they thought they could control. Now, every time I walk down to the dock and dive into the cool water of my lake, I think about that fine she tried to slap on me. And I can't help but laugh. Because in the end, I didn't just win, I changed everything.